My name is Josephine, 36 years old, living in Portland, Oregon. I've been married to Elliot for 8 years. Strange as it sounds, all that time, I felt like a guest who overstayed her welcome in the Morgan family, my husband's family. They weren't overtly cruel. They greeted politely, smiled at parties, and mailed birthday cards on time. Yet somehow I always felt unnecessary, lonely in my own marriage, surrounded by people who used the word family so fluently. I'm a self-employed brand designer, not flashy or headline-worthy, but I love what I do. What I couldn't get used to was the look in my mother-in-law Lydia's eyes every time I mentioned a client instead of a boss, or the smug smile from my sister-in-law Melissa when I wore a self-made dress to the Christmas party I endured. For 8 years, I thought that if I were patient and kind enough, they would eventually accept me. I memorized everyone's birthday, picked gifts they liked, even forced myself to learn the exact martini mix that Howard, my father-in-law, preferred. Elliot always said they just need more time, you're being too sensitive. And I believed him. Until that 4th of July BBQ last year. Every summer, the Morgans host a grand barbecue. Neighbors, colleagues, old college friends all invited. For them, it's a moment to assert status, build connections, and, of course, show off a little. That morning, I got up early to bake lemon bars, my grandmother's recipe, the only thing Lydia once mildly praised as not bad. I picked a cream linen dress that Elliot called neat and proper, tied my hair up and wore nude lipstick. Not too flashy, not too plain, just enough. When we arrived, Melissa ran to hug Elliot like always, then gave me a once-over with that same judging gaze. "You look simple," she said. "I'm guessing it's that rustic elegance vibe?" I smiled, swallowing the urge to say, "And what are you—" "Gaudy and forgettable." 3 hours in, everyone gathered around the patio table. Elliot talked investments with his dad. Melissa bragged about meeting a director in LA. I took the chance to mention a recent branding project I'd completed for a local coffee shop. The first time I felt confident enough to share something with them. "It's opening next week," I said. I handled the full brand identity, from logo to menus. Before I could finish, Melissa set her wine down, leaned in, and smirked. "You know, if you disappeared from the planet tomorrow, no one would even notice. You do realize you're boring everyone to death, right?" The table burst into laughter. Elliot laughed along, like a reflex. Lydia chuckled behind her napkin. Howard laughed out loud. And me? I just stared at Melissa, lifted the skewer in my hand, and said clearly, "Well, let's find out, shall we?" Silence dropped over the table like a cold wind. Melissa stopped laughing. Elliot looked confused. No one spoke. Until Lydia broke the tension with, "Howard, your turn to carve the brisket." I didn't need another bite. No one asked. Elliot was busy helping his dad with the grill. For the rest of the evening, I sat quietly. No smiling, no small talk. I just observed. I watched how they patted each other on the back, smiled, and chatted like a genetically synced tribe, where I would always be the outsider. I watched Elliot, my husband, the man who once promised to always stand by me, now just one of them. That night, as Elliot stepped into the shower, I packed my laptop, notebook, passport, and a few clothes into a small suitcase. On the kitchen counter, I left a handwritten note. "I'm going to disappear for a while. Don't worry, and don't look for me." No anger, no tears, just a decision made after 8 years of silent erasure. As simple as the way they had made me invisible all along. I was born and raised in a small town near Boise, Idaho, where winters cracked your skin and summers left no room for idleness. My mom was a hairdresser. My dad died in a car accident when I was in 4th grade. I learned early, if you want something, you get up and build it yourself. I started drawing in high school, working part-time at a bakery, teaching myself Photoshop on an old beat-up laptop. College came from a full scholarship and TAing 3 courses. No one paved the road for me. Maybe that's why Elliot was drawn to me. We met at a community design seminar hosted by the architecture department. He walked in wearing a Brooks Brothers shirt. I was helping print materials for the organizers. He asked what I thought about the newly renovated City Hall building, and we debated for almost 90 minutes. He said I had a fire, something he claimed was rare in a world full of PowerPoint people and spreadsheets. 3 months later, we moved in together. A year after that, we had a lakefront wedding in Vermont, 120 guests, a live string quartet, and a 3-course menu by a private chef. I still remember standing in the middle of that reception wearing the expensive dress Lydia picked for me, looking around and thinking, this isn't my world. But maybe I can learn to live in it. I was wrong. The Morgans, my in-laws, and Elliot's sister never insulted me directly. They wrapped their comments in politeness, sugar-coated just enough to leave no room for confrontation, and slowly, I started shrinking without noticing it. Oh, Josephine, you work from home? Must be nice, not having to deal with rush hour traffic. You bake these yourself? How wonderful that you have so much free time. Did that client pick you because Elliot introduced you? When I received a local emerging designer award, Lydia said, "Oh, I saw that award last year. It's one of those community voted ones, right? Cute." Howard once gave me a book titled Real Success: Classic Business Principles for the Modern Woman, saying, "Something to help build a bit of foundation, dear." I smiled. I always smiled. I kept believing that maybe if I worked harder, behaved better, they'd finally see me differently. But one thing they could never quite hide was this. They saw me as temporarily acceptable, never truly worthy. Melissa, Elliot's sister, made it most obvious. When Elliot gifted me a commercial printer to start my design studio, Melissa asked, right in front of me, "Did you buy it yourself or was that Elliot's money?" I looked at Elliot. He just chuckled and said, "She's just joking. Don't take it so seriously." That line, "Don't overreact, don't be sensitive," they didn't mean anything by it, was the chorus of my marriage. And if you hear that enough, you start wondering if maybe you are the problem. At first, I had tried inviting Lydia to lunch. She declined politely. I suggested a family trip. Elliot told me, "You wouldn't enjoy their kind of vacation. Golf and conferences. You'd be bored." Melissa, whenever she had the chance, would pull Elliot aside and whisper, "Don't you think she seems tired of our family? Maybe she's one of those girls who only fits in small-town life?" And Elliot? He stayed on the sidelines. When I said Melissa's remarks were inappropriate, he'd just say, "She's always been like that. Every family has someone difficult." I wasn't a child. I didn't need them to love me like blood, but I had hoped, at the very least, they would treat me as a real part of their lives, not just a background prop in their family photo. Then last year, I lost a major contract because Elliot asked me to push a deadline so I could fly with him to a Charleston event. "It's just a few days," he said. "You can work anytime." I lost that client, a sustainable fashion brand I'd been chasing for 6 months. Elliot didn't apologize. He just said, "There'll be other projects. Family still comes first, right?" I nodded, but something inside me started to crack. A fracture, waiting to split open. And that day, when Melissa said the world wouldn't notice if I disappeared, I finally understood. The fracture had gone too deep. It wasn't the joke, it was everything. Every tiny wound stacked over 8 years. I didn't disappear. I just stopped existing in their world. I don't remember exactly when I started crying that night after the barbecue. I just remember boarding the early morning bus from Portland to Spokane, where my sister lives, with puffy eyes and a tight grip on a small rolling suitcase filled with a few clothes and a hard drive containing all my client files. I had no plan, just a need to leave, right now. Because if I didn't, there'd be nothing left of me to hold on to. The sad thing is, this wasn't the first time I'd felt myself disappear. I'd been fading slowly, year by year, since I walked into the Morgan household. There were times I didn't even recognize the woman in the mirror. The woman who once confidently pitched designs to investor panels now struggled to speak at a family dinner. I used to have friends, used to laugh freely, used to argue with passion. Now I just stayed quiet. I still remember the moment everything truly began to unravel. I was 6 weeks pregnant. It was unexpected, but to me, a joy. I felt excited, already reading parenting books, jotting down every change in my body. I hadn't even told my mom yet, but I told Elliot. His reaction? This really isn't a good time, Joe. You've got a tight project deadline, and my family's prepping for the Florida trip. If you don't go, you'll just fall further out of favor with Mom. Are you even sure? I said nothing. That was his response to becoming a father. Not panic, just annoyance. I went to the first prenatal appointment alone. Waited over an hour. Got blood drawn, had my pressure checked. Waited some more. No one held my hand. No one asked if I was okay. By week 8, I was bleeding. I spent 3 hours in the ER. I didn't even call Elliot. When I got home, I texted him. I miscarried. He replied, I'm in a meeting. We'll talk tonight. That night, he brought home takeout and asked if I could eat. No hug, no real question. A week later, Melissa sent me a link to an article about how stress affects pregnancy, followed by a sad face emoji. I typed a reply, then deleted it. Not worth it. Only Tessa, my sister, called me every night. She listened to me cry, told me to stop blaming myself. When I said I felt hollow, she gently said, You've been robbed of everything a mother should feel, and the worst part is no one around you even cares. That's not your fault. Tessa's words were the first real wake-up bell. I started looking at old photos. I used to go hiking every month. I painted murals for orphanages. I taught design classes at the community college. Every meaningful thing I did had slowly been replaced with cocktail parties, quiet dinners beside Elliot at Morgan family functions, and lonely nights in the kitchen while he traveled for work without asking if I wanted to come. I realized I'd become a hollowed-out version of myself, and somehow I'd convinced myself that was called growing up. The barbecue was my breaking point. I wasn't surprised when Melissa said what she said. What chilled me was Elliot's laugh. Not a slip, it was a nod, a she's got a point kind of laugh. That was when I knew I'd lost the one thing that mattered most. Respect. Not theirs. His. The next morning on the bus, I opened my phone. 4 messages. 1 from Elliot asking where I was. 3 from Lydia. 1 short question. 1 question mark emoji. And 1 reminding me she'd already booked the flight for Napa Valley next weekend. Not 1 message asking if I was okay. Not 1 asking why I left. Just surprised that my absence disrupted their plans. I smiled faintly. Turns out Melissa was right. I disappeared, and no one even stopped to ask why. Just that it was inconvenient. But strangely, at that moment, I felt lighter than ever. No more clinging, no more proving, no more pleading. I didn't need their approval anymore. I just needed mine. I looked out the window. Sunlight flickered through the trees, bright and gentle. On my lap was a fresh notebook. I was ready to start writing everything again. In my own handwriting, I arrived in Denver on a gray morning in early September, carrying a small, rolling suitcase, 3 boxes shipped ahead, and a short message to my sister. I'm here. I'm okay. Can I borrow your sofa for a few weeks? Tessa didn't ask questions. She just replied, There's a spare bed, and it's sunny here. Her apartment was on the 3rd floor of an old red brick building, but it felt strangely warm. The window overlooked an indie bookstore across the street, and in the mornings you could hear the soft hum of streetcars from downtown. On my first day in Denver, I just sat quietly in an armchair by the window, sipping a hot coffee made by Tessa, thinking about nothing. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to do nothing, to stop striving, to stop proving, just breathe. 3 days later, I rented a small studio in Capitol Hill. 1 bedroom, a little kitchen, dark wood floors, and an exposed brick wall in the living room. The windows stuck and the shower needed fixing, but I loved it instantly. It wasn't fancy, not modern minimalist, not like the house I'd shared with Elliot in Portland, but it was mine. I opened a new bank account at a local branch and transferred the remaining savings from our joint account. What the law allowed. I canceled the Morgan's family credit card, called to end every subscription under Elliot's name. Cutting each small tie felt lighter than shedding a suitcase. I uploaded my profile to 3 freelancer platforms, rebuilt my portfolio, carefully removing any project connected to the Morgan network. I rewrote my bio. I specialize in indigenous brand design and emotional storytelling for businesses that want to tell their truth. It sounded poetic, but it was what I always believed, before I drowned in cocktail meetings and projects needing Richard Morgan's nod of approval. A week later, I walked into Maple and Gold Cafe looking for Wi-Fi and a cappuccino. But I found something more. The cafe was small, with a low ceiling, warm golden light, and the smell of fresh pastries wafting in from the back. One west wall was hand-painted in acrylic, showing a maple tree mid-fall, leaves scattered like broken memories. I stared at it, unblinking. Not because it was beautiful, but because it was right. The kind of right that stirs up the person you used to be. The woman behind the counter caught my gaze. Her gray-streaked hair was tied in a high bun, sun-worn skin, sharp eyes. "You want to ask about the painting, don't you?" she said first, voice husky but gentle. I nodded. "Who painted it?" "A kid, last year. Art student. Terrible with money. I let them trade pastry debt for the wall." She smirked. "I'm Margot, owner. And you?" "Josephine. I'm a designer, or trying to be, again." Margot gave me a slow scan, like she was reading a barcode. You free the next 3 days?" 3 days later, I started working at Maple and Gold. Not as a barista, but to redesign the menu, the outdoor signage, and the packaging for a new line of handmade cookies Margot had just launched. "I don't want anything that looks like Starbucks, you get me?" she said firmly. "I want something that makes people think of their grandma's kitchen, not an office downtown." "Then I'll do it by hand. No pre-made fonts." "Good." Margot raised an eyebrow. "Don't disappoint me." Margot wasn't warm. She didn't give praise easily, didn't ask about my past. But every time I handed her a draft, she studied it closely, pointed out proportion flaws, and said, "This isn't bad. Now make 2 more versions. Don't be afraid of color." Little by little, I learned to trust my hands again. I started sketching, not for clients, but for myself. The lines weren't perfect, but they had soul. Margot looked at one piece and nodded. "Now that looks like your line work, not someone else's label stuck on you." A month later, I had 3 new clients, thanks to Margot's referrals: an indie bookstore, a recycled crafts collective, a nonprofit teaching job skills to single moms. I no longer waited for someone else's nod. I didn't need their stamp to prove I was enough. That evening, I walked home under a gentle Denver drizzle. The rain wasn't cold, just enough to make me tilt my head back and take a deep breath. For the first time in a long time, I felt clear, no longer blurred by anyone else. 1 year after I left Portland, I walked into the Grand Aurora Hotel lobby in Denver, wearing a lanyard with the Carlington Foods logo, America's 6th largest food corporation. Below the logo was my name, Josephine Reed, lead brand designer, Maple Studio. Today was the opening of the National Consumer Goods Expo, where Carlington would unveil a new brand identity for its premium organic product line. I was responsible for all the design, packaging, point-of-sale branding, and the overall voice of the campaign. And the twist? This project fell under the consumer branch of Sterling & Co., the company founded by my former father-in-law, Howard Morgan. I found out about the connection later than I should have. When Carlington signed the contract with our studio, there was no mention of Sterling. I only realized it when the gala invite arrived with Sterling & Co., hospitality partner, printed in bold. At first I hesitated, but then I remembered Margot's words. If you're still avoiding them, it means they still hold the keys to a room you already walked out of. Go back and lock it yourself. So I went. Today, I didn't bring anyone for backup. I brought myself. Short, dark brown hair, a fitted ash-gray dress, and black shoes that made no sound but carried every step firmly. Before I even entered the main hall, I heard a familiar voice, Howard's booming laugh. I spotted them near the wine bar, Melissa, of course, glowing in red, her arm looped through Elliot's. Still my husband on paper, though we'd lived apart for a year. His mother, Lydia, leaned in to whisper something to someone, her navy dress eerily reminiscent of the night I last had dinner with them. I didn't dodge. I walked straight into the conference hall, to the check-in table, and signed my name. Welcome, Miss Reed. The folks at Sterling are really looking forward to meeting the woman behind this brilliant design, the staffer said, smiling. I simply nodded. 30 minutes later, I was speaking with a Walmart rep about display concepts when a hand tapped my shoulder. I turned. Howard. Josephine. Mr. Morgan. He smiled, a little slower than usual. Didn't expect it to be you, but the design definitely has a signature look. Thank you. Very proud of this project. Who are you working with these days? Maple Studio. I co-founded it with a partner here in Denver. Howard paused. No longer freelancing. No, I rebuilt from scratch. And this time, I get to name the thing. He nodded. Said nothing more, but something flickered in his eyes. Maybe surprise, maybe discomfort. I didn't care. The second to approach was Lydia. She appeared beside me at the drink station, as if by chance. Josephine. I heard you live in Denver now. Yes, I've settled here. Elliot hasn't said much. He just said you two were taking some time. I smiled slightly. Maybe he's not ready to say we're over. She looked at me longer than I expected. Back then, I thought, you weren't right for the Morgans, but seeing you now, I must admit, I didn't see the whole picture. It doesn't matter anymore. Being right for myself is enough. She didn't reply, but she nodded, then stepped away, as if unsure how to speak to someone she once pushed out of their dinner table. When I returned to the stage area to prepare for my presentation, Elliot was already there, one hand holding a glass, the other in his pocket, somehow looking smaller than before. You've changed a lot. You haven't, I said, voice light. I read that feature about you in the Creative Edge. Your studio's getting big. I said nothing. He exhaled. I know I wasn't there when you needed me, and I regret it now. Elliot, you don't have to regret anything. The mistake was forcing me into a life where I always had to shrink myself. He nodded. No rebuttal this time. Can I buy you coffee after the launch? I looked at him. No anger. No longing. Just calm. If it's a conversation between two people who once shared a path, then yes. When I stepped onto the stage and opened the first slide, I saw them. All four Morgans, seated in the second row. No one said a word. But nothing needed to be said. I had once been invisible in their world. Now I was the center of my own. After the presentation, I stepped off stage with a strange feeling. Not relief, not pride, just clarity, as if I had stood in front of an old version of myself and said, I came back, but not to ask permission. I was gathering my sketch drafts when Melissa walked over. She wore a sharply tailored gray suit, her heavy heels striking the floor like punctuation marks. Your presentation exceeded expectations, she said, narrowing her eyes slightly. I thought Maple Studio only did local artsy projects. I smiled, unmoved by her familiar rhythm. A studio's limits stop where a client's imagination begins. Luckily, Carlington has no shortage of that. Melissa paused. I could see something shift behind her eyes, something she couldn't quite control. Did you take the project because you knew Sterling was sponsoring it? No, I said plainly, but even if I had known, I still would have done it. Not to prove anything, but because I'm good at what I do. She said nothing. For the first time, I saw Melissa without a comeback, just looking at me, really looking, like she was trying to understand how the woman she once saw as replaceable had become this version. I know, I was harsh back then, she said after a pause, but so was everyone. We were raised in a system where silence or backstabbing were accepted ways to keep order. You weren't the only one, I said evenly, but you need to understand Pain doesn't get canceled out by explanations. It only ends when the person causing it learns to stop. Melissa nodded. Her eyes softened. I've been in therapy. My doctor says I have a pattern of rehearsing control in relationships. I didn't think I was that type until I saw you walk away without warning. I spent a week realizing you didn't leave out of anger. You just didn't want to be pulled back in. I said nothing more, because sometimes the best apologies are the ones that ripen quietly in the person saying them. We parted with a simple nod, not warm, but enough to close an old chapter. As I walked toward the exhibition hall, I saw Elliot leaning against a balcony, staring at his phone, but clearly unfocused. When he noticed me, he squared his shoulders like it took all his courage just to speak. Would you sit with me for a few minutes? I nodded. Not out of obligation, but because I wanted to see if the Elliot of today finally understood why he lost the wife who walked beside him for 8 years. We sat on a bench near the hotel cafe. He ordered me a latte, just how I liked it. Still remembered, even after a year apart. I've been seeing a therapist for the last 6 months, he began. Not because you left, because I realized I was hollow. I let him talk. I used to think I was fair, rational, kind, but really I just lived in a system designed to shield me from any emotions I didn't want to take responsibility for. Do you remember the day you lost the baby? I gripped my coffee cup. I remember, and I remember doing nothing. I even felt secretly relieved my travel schedule wasn't disrupted. A cruel sentence, but the bravest confession I'd ever heard from Elliot. For the first time, I saw him not as part of the Morgan family, but as a man learning to face himself. I know it's too late, but if any part of you wants to try again, even just a little, I'm ready to change. I looked him in the eyes. Elliot, I believe you can change, but that doesn't mean we're still right for each other. You don't love me anymore? I still do, but it's the love of someone who used to love you. Now, I love myself more. He lowered his head, nodded, then exhaled like he was finally letting go of something he'd gripped for a year. You forgive me? I don't need to, I just need to be me. We said goodbye with a short hug. No old cologne, no empty promises. Just a quiet acknowledgement we'd reached the end. Not with bitterness, but with clarity. I left the hotel just as the sun dipped behind the skyline. The Denver breeze carried a hint of early autumn chill, but my heart was warm. I used to chase recognition. Now I recognize myself, and that is enough. 2 weeks after the Carlington conference, I received an email titled, Design Quotation Request, Sterling & Co. Requests a direct meeting. The sender was Melissa Morgan, now the new creative director at Sterling. No veiled words, no nod to the past, just business. A professional invitation. A meeting to exchange ideas for an upcoming media campaign. I read it over and over, smiling. Not out of satisfaction, but because I had finally stepped out of the gray zone I'd once been trapped in, between the need to be accepted and the fear of being rejected. I replied briefly, Thank you, Melissa. My schedule's full until mid-month, but I can arrange a Zoom call after the 16th. Please send over the detailed brief in advance. 3 days later, during a virtual meeting, I presented the initial concept to Sterling. When I finished, Melissa paused for a moment, then said, No sarcasm, no sidestepping. This is the most professional proposal we've received all year. Thank you. I responded without hesitation. I'll only take this project if all design rights are protected and my studio's name appears publicly in all media materials. I won't stay behind the curtain anymore. Melissa nodded. You deserve that. I'll sign off on every term you request. For the first time, my former sister-in-law acknowledged my skills, not with flattery, but with contracts, clear terms, and boundaries respected. A week later, at a networking event in Denver, I ran into Mrs. Lydia, my ex-mother-in-law, there with a partner from the cosmetics industry. She recognized me the moment I stepped past the cocktail bar. Josephine. I turned. It was still her signature closed lips smile, but this time without the critical eyes. I just heard about the Sterling project. Melissa is very impressed. So am I. I simply nodded. Thank you. I used to think you didn't have what it takes to live in our world, but maybe I was wrong about that world and about you. For the first time, Lydia dropped the mask. She stood straight, didn't search for a graceful exit, didn't perform superiority. You weren't the only one mistaken, I replied gently, but I don't need an apology anymore. I'm at peace with what I know, and I know I belong here. Lydia nodded, then stepped away. No drama. Just the right ending between two women who once saw each other as outsiders. A few weeks later, I signed the contract to buy a small house in Edgewater, a lakeside neighborhood on Denver's west side where the sunset pours over the water like it was designed for someone learning how to begin again. A single-story wood home, pitched roof, white walls, big windows facing the garden. I didn't choose it for its style, but because it felt like me. Solid, simple, with no need to show off. I paid for it entirely with money I earned. No loans, no co-signers, just work, persistence, and the right choices I finally gave myself permission to make. On move-in day, Margot, the owner of Maple and Gold, brought over a loaf of rosemary toast and a jar of hand-roasted coffee. You built this whole network with your own hands, Josephine. This house is just physical proof of that. I hugged her, then looked out the window. Outside, the wooden fence still needed painting, and the stone path was missing a few pieces, but I didn't mind. All I felt was peace, the kind I hadn't known in nearly a decade. I hung my first piece of wall art, a personal design never released, a woman walking out of shadow, holding a glowing key. Beneath it, the words, "You don't need a seat at their table when you've built your own." A year ago, I left with just a suitcase and fingers stiff from holding on too tightly for too long. Now I have a home, a career, a community, and most importantly, I have myself. Whole. Without needing anyone's permission to exist. I didn't disappear. I just stopped living in someone else's story. And this time, I'm the one holding the pen. Josephine's story is a powerful reminder that sometimes the bravest thing isn't staying to be accepted. It's walking away to define your own worth. In real life, many people are learning to leave relationships that shrink them, even if they're called family. Not everyone deserves a place in your life, especially if the price is losing yourself. Like Josephine, you don't need to be seen by others. Just don't lose sight of who you are. Have you ever faced something similar to Josephine's journey? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to follow the channel for more honest, deeply moving stories about family and life.